Jack heard the laughter before he even saw who it came from. Sharp, careless, slicing right through the music drifting across the ballroom. It was the kind of laughter that didn't just fill a room, but filled a man's chest with heat, shame, and something darker. He didn't look up at first. He didn't need to. He had spent enough of his life around men like that to recognize the tone. Mockery. He felt it settle under his skin, pricking, pushing, daring him to react. But instead of shrinking back, Jack straightened his shoulders, letting the tension roll down his spine. His pride hadn't just been touched. It had been struck deliberately. And for the first time in years, something ancient, something he had buried long ago, stirred inside him, a reminder of who he really was. He exhaled slowly, lifted his chin, and turned toward the sound of the sneering voice, toward the cluster of people who seemed to find his presence endlessly amusing. His gaze passed over faces he barely recognized, all polished and smug, all certain they knew the hierarchy in this room. They thought he was irrelevant. They thought he was harmless. They thought wrong. Richard Hayes, CEO of Atlas Dynamics, silently approached Jack with a stiff smile. It was practiced, diplomatic, dripping with corporate charm. Jack had seen that same smile 1,000 times from 1,000 other executives who thought power meant control. Richard didn't know any better. "Richard," Jack said quietly, "if this continues, I'll make sure your employment contract is the only thing that gets shredded tonight." The smile on Richard's face froze for a heartbeat, just long enough for Jack to see the fear crack through. Jack didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture. He didn't need to. The threat was precise, delivered like a surgeon's cut. He let it linger. Then he walked past Richard as if the man no longer existed. The ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria opened before him like a scene from a dream. Gold-drenched chandeliers casting warm light on polished marble floors, waiters weaving through the crowd with silver trays, and the soft hum of expensive laughter drifting through the air. It was sophisticated, elegant, everything a world-class gala should be. But to Jack, it felt foreign, unfamiliar, strangely hollow. He had spent 15 years away from places like this, 15 years building something in silence, unnoticed, uncredited, 15 years letting the world forget him. Apparently, it succeeded, and then he saw her. Emily stood near the center of the room in an emerald dress that wrapped around her like liquid luxury. Her co-workers surrounded her, smiling, leaning in, basking in the glow of her confidence. She laughed, brightly, effortlessly, and a strange pull tugged at Jack's chest. He remembered when that laugh belonged to him alone, before boardrooms and late-night presentations swallowed her whole. Tonight she looked radiant, untouchable, like she belonged here in a way he never could. A knot tightened in his stomach. He wasn't jealous of her success. He had always wanted her to rise high. But he realized now that he had been absent so long the world had built a version of Emily he no longer recognized, and a version of himself she no longer respected. As Jack watched, the circle around her shifted, making room for a man who pushed forward with the arrogance of someone who'd never been told no. Jack recognized him immediately. Chad Wilson, Senior Operations Manager, loudmouth, corporate clown, the man who believed jokes were currency. Chad looked Jack over from shoes to collar, eyes gleaming with the confidence of someone convinced he was the superior one. "So, Jack," Chad said loudly, "what have you been up to these days?" His tone implied he already knew the answer, and that the answer wasn't impressive. Emily didn't interrupt. Worse, she laughed, a soft, embarrassed laugh, the kind people let out when they want to seem agreeable in front of their peers. Jack felt that laugh more sharply than the mockery itself. He forced himself to breathe evenly. When Chad saw he wasn't getting a reaction yet, he leaned even closer, wearing that same grin that had started everything. "Come on, man," Chad said, voice carrying across the polished floors. "How's it feel being dragged here as the +1 this time? You keeping busy? Or taking it easy these days?" Emily bit her lip and looked away, but she didn't stop the others from laughing. That was the moment something inside Jack snapped. Richard tried to step in then, his voice shaky. "Chad, maybe we should get back to the presentation." But Chad wouldn't stop. He smelled blood in the water. "What?" Chad smirked. "We're just having fun." "Right, Jack. I mean, we all know some people aren't built for real pressure." The laughter grew, louder, meaner. The sound echoed against the crystal chandeliers and burned its way into Jack's chest. Emily didn't stop them. She didn't say a word. She didn't even try. Jack felt the heat rise slowly through him. Not anger, but clarity. Ice-cold clarity. For years he had let people underestimate him. For years he had allowed assumptions to protect his privacy. For years he had lived quietly, letting the company he built run under someone else's name. Tonight, that ended. He turned to Chad and spoke calmly, clearly, every syllable slicing through the laughter. "I own 90% of Atlas Dynamics." The room didn't quiet gradually. It stopped, all at once, as if someone had cut the soundtrack of reality. Eyes widened. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Chad blinked rapidly, his smirk collapsing into confusion. What?" he stammered. Emily stared at Jack as if he had just spoken a foreign language. Richard turned pale, visibly pale, gripping his champagne glass so tightly his knuckles went white. Jack didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. But someone else reacted. Emily. The glass slipped from her hand, shattered. Crystal shards burst across the marble floor with a sound so sharp it might as well have been a gunshot. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jack didn't stay to enjoy it. He stepped over the glittering fragments without looking back, walking out of the ballroom, ignoring Emily's sudden gasp, ignoring Chad's stuttered questions, ignoring the weight of 100 shocked eyes tracking his every step. He reached the grand lobby, tall ceilings, polished stone pillars, the scent of expensive cologne, and only then slowed down. He didn't run. He didn't hurry. His walk was steady, controlled. He could feel the power settling back onto his shoulders like a familiar coat. "Jack!" Emily's voice cracked through the lobby. She came rushing after him, heels clacking, dress swaying. "Jack, wait!" He stopped. He didn't turn. Not at first. When he finally faced her, she looked breathless, flushed, confused. "How?" she demanded, words trembling. "How could you possibly own the company I work for? How could you never tell me? How is that even— Jack, what is going on?" Her world was spinning. His had just snapped back into place. Jack looked at her, calm and unshaken, and said, "Emily, it's time you finally learned who your husband is." Jack didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Emily was already spiraling, her eyes darting across his face, searching for some sign that this was all a joke, a misunderstanding, something she could neatly rearrange in her mind. But he wasn't giving her anything to hold on to. "Jack, you can't just say something like that in front of my entire department," she whispered, clutching the railing beside the marble staircase, as if she suddenly needed it for balance. 90%? That's impossible. Jack, what are you talking about? He watched a bead of panic form in her expression. She looked like someone who had walked into a room she thought she knew, only to find the floor rearranged beneath her feet. It's not impossible, Jack replied simply. It's just unexpected. For you. Unexpected? She repeated, almost laughing from disbelief. Jack, you build software in your home office? You consult? I never corrected you, he said. The words sliced the space between them. Emily's breath hitched. Why wouldn't you correct me? Because you never asked, Jack answered. You never wanted to know more. You liked the version of me you could explain to your friends, the tech husband who works from home while you climb the corporate ladder. That's not fair, she snapped. It's exactly fair, Jack countered, his tone still soft but unwavering. I never hid what I did. You just never listened deeply enough to hear it. Emily's throat tightened, but she stayed silent. Jack took a slow breath. He hadn't planned to reveal everything here, in the middle of the Waldorf Astoria lobby, with waiters and guests pretending not to stare. But tonight had forced his hand. For the first time in years, he saw Emily as she had become. Not malicious, but careless. Too accustomed to assuming she knew everything about him. Too willing to let others mock him because she believed he had nothing to lose. She had forgotten who he used to be, and she had no idea who he still was. You want an explanation? Jack said. Fine, you'll get one, but not out here. He motioned toward the elevator. Emily hesitated but followed, her heels clacking sharply against the marble. The doors closed, sealing them inside a mirrored cage filled with silence thick enough to feel. Emily stared at their reflections, her shaken posture, his unmovable calm. When the doors opened, Jack led her into their penthouse suite, one they had gotten as part of the event package. It was modern, sleek, dimly lit, with a panoramic view of the city glowing beneath them. Emily barely noticed it. Jack walked straight to the desk where his briefcase lay, unlocked it, and pulled out a black matte folder with silver etching. Emily blinked. What is that? A reminder of what I built, Jack said, and placed it on the table. Inside were certificates, contracts, merger agreements, and the one document that changed everything. The legal notice announcing the merger of Orion Systems with Atlas Dynamics. Emily pressed a hand to her mouth. Orion Systems? Jack, that was... You founded... I did, he confirmed. At 22. Emily's voice dropped to a whisper. But Orion went under. No, Jack corrected. Orion saved Atlas. Her confusion returned, sharper than before. He gestured at the documents. 15 years ago, Atlas Dynamics was weeks away from collapse. Mismanaged, drowning in debt, hemorrhaging clients. They needed technology, mine. They needed innovation, mine. They needed capital, systems, infrastructure, stability. All mine? Emily staggered back a step. Yes, Jack continued. I merged Orion with Atlas. I pumped in the capital that kept Atlas alive, and in exchange I took 90% of the shares, control, ownership, direction. But you were never listed, never mentioned, never... I set up a blind trust, he said calmly. I didn't want to be the face. I didn't need it. Not then. He paused. And not until tonight. Emily stared at him like she was seeing a ghost wearing her husband's face. So all these years, she whispered, you owned the company, and you let me talk about my promotions, my deadlines, my stress, like you had nothing to do with it? Yes, Why? Jack's voice softened, but not with pity. Because I loved seeing you succeed without knowing you were married to the man who signed your CEO's checks. Emily's eyes glassed over with something between heartbreak and guilt. But if you own everything, she said, voice trembling, why stay so quiet? Why not lead? Why not? Because I already did that once, Jack replied. I didn't want to spend my life in boardrooms again. I wanted peace. I wanted a family. I wanted you. The room went still. He let the silence sit for a moment, letting Emily absorb every word. Then his tone hardened, not cruel, but resolute. But tonight, when Chad mocked me, when the room laughed, when you didn't say a word, not even one, something in me woke up. Emily swallowed. Jack, I didn't mean... You didn't stop them, he said, gently but firmly. And that told me everything. Her eyes brimmed with regret. Then Jack reached for his phone. Who are you calling? Emily whispered. My attorney, Jack said, stepping away. Marcus and I have a lot of work to do. Her expression shattered. Jack, no, please, don't start anything because of them. These are my coworkers, my world. And Atlas Dynamics is mine, Jack said, finishing for her. He pressed the phone to his ear, his voice steady as steel. Marcus, it's time. Start pulling the audit reports. All of them. Emily's knees nearly buckled. Jack walked past her toward his office, his energy electric, focused. Because for the first time in 15 years, he was stepping back into his kingdom. Jack barely felt the cold night air as he stepped out of the hotel and crossed the nearly empty street. His mind was still replaying Richard Hayes's face, the exact moment the old CEO realized that the man he'd mocked, the man he'd underestimated, the man he'd dismissed as an accessory to Emily, was the one holding the majority stake in Atlas Dynamics. But it wasn't shock that echoed in Jack's chest. It was clarity. Clarity he hadn't felt in years. For the first time since he'd put Atlas behind him, he understood. The company he had quietly carried on his shoulders for over a decade had rotted from the inside out. And the people he had once trusted had treated him like an outsider in his own creation. He wasn't going to let that continue. Inside the lobby of his penthouse building, he pressed the elevator button and leaned against the cool marble wall. His phone buzzed. Emily's name lit the screen. He didn't answer. Not yet. The elevator doors opened, and he stepped inside. By the time he walked into the penthouse, he was done being passive. He headed straight to his office, a room he hadn't spent much time in these past years. He flipped on the lights. The shelves were dusty. The leather chair had indentations from long-forgotten nights. The desk drawers hadn't been touched in years. But the safe was exactly where he'd left it. Jack knelt down, spun the combination, and pulled the heavy door open. Inside were documents he had locked away the day Atlas Dynamics merged with Orion Systems. Documents he hadn't planned to use again. But plans changed. He lifted the thick folder of stock certificates, merger agreements, and the trust documents he'd created to hide his ownership. He'd placed everything in a blind trust 15 years earlier to protect Atlas, to give the company the investor confidence it needed after the near collapse. He wasn't supposed to control it openly, only quietly. But the ownership? That had always remained his. He carried the folder to the dining table, spread everything out, and began reading, page by page, signature by signature, date by date, unraveling a history that no one in the new Atlas leadership even knew existed. His phone buzzed again. This time he answered. Emily's voice filled the speaker, breathless, panicked. "Jack, are you home? Please don't hang up. I'm coming over." He didn't respond. He simply ended the call. 15 minutes later, the elevator doors to the penthouse opened without him even buzzing her in. She must have sweet-talked the concierge or slipped him some excuse. Her heels clicked violently against the hardwood floor as she rushed inside. She froze at the sight of the dining table. Her eyes widened. What is all this? Jack didn't lift his head. Everything you never asked about. She swallowed. So you're actually serious? You're saying you own Atlas? All of it? Jack, that doesn't make any sense. He finally looked up at her. You've worked there for 5 years and never once asked how the company survived the crash 15 years ago? I wasn't there back then. Exactly, he said quietly. But I was. Emily stepped closer, anger and confusion twisting together in her voice. You told everyone you worked in tech consulting. You said you were retired. You never said, I never corrected you. Jack interrupted. There's a difference. She stared at him, stunned. So you let everyone think you were just this supportive husband? Because I was, he said. I supported your career. I supported everything you wanted. I didn't need credit. She shook her head in disbelief. Why didn't you tell me? Jack leaned back, exhaling slowly. Would it have changed anything tonight? Would you have defended me? Would you have stopped Chad from humiliating me? Would you have corrected anyone? Emily opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Silence answered for her. Jack stood up and walked past her toward the window, looking out over the glowing skyline. Emily, I didn't ask you to worship me. I didn't ask you to brag about me to your coworkers. But I expected one thing, just one, she whispered. Respect. Jack nodded. And you didn't give it. She swallowed hard. Jack, I didn't know. You didn't want to know. For the first time that night, Emily had nothing to say. She stood behind him, hugging her elbows, looking incredibly small in the reflection of the glass. Finally, she managed, What are you going to do? Jack turned back to the table and picked up his phone. I'm going to remind Atlas, who built it. He dialed a number. Marcus answered on the first ring. Jack, I was expecting your call. Jack looked at Emily, his voice steady. We're starting the audit. Everything. Every file. Every contract. I want the full picture. Marcus replied without hesitation. I'll have a team ready in the morning. Jack ended the call and met Emily's eyes. If you want to be angry at me, go ahead, but don't pretend I started this. Her voice cracked. Are you firing Richard? I'm exposing Richard, Jack corrected. There's a difference. Emily took a shaky breath. What about me? Jack walked past her again, not coldly, not dismissively, but with a calm certainty she had never seen in him before. That, he said, depends on which side you choose. Emily didn't follow him this time. She just sat down at the table, staring at the documents spread out before her. The proof that the man she had allowed others to mock was the one signing their paychecks. Jack didn't look back when he headed to the bedroom. He didn't need to. Tomorrow, the real war for Atlas Dynamics would begin. And for the first time in 15 years, Jack Morgan would walk into the company not as a ghost, but as its owner. The sun had barely risen when Jack stepped out of his car in the underground parking garage beneath Atlas Dynamics headquarters. His reflection stared back at him from the tinted window, a version of himself he hadn't seen in years. Sharp charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, a watch he hadn't worn since the merger. He didn't look like a man playing supportive husband or quiet observer. He looked like the owner. Marcus was already waiting for him near the private elevator, leaning against a pillar with a cup of coffee. "You ready?" he asked. Jack nodded once. "More than ready." As they stepped into the elevator, Jack felt an unexpected calmness. The doors slid open to the executive floor, and for a moment the hallway fell into complete silence. Employees who had only ever known him as Emily's husband stared with wide eyes as he passed. Conversations stopped. Phones lowered. Keyboards froze. Jack didn't feed the spectacle. He walked with steady, deliberate steps straight toward Richard Hayes's office. Richard was pacing, visibly anxious. His assistant had clearly warned him the moment Jack walked in the building. "Jack," Richard began, voice trembling slightly. "Listen, before you do something rash." Jack cut him off by placing a thick binder on the CEO's desk. "Financial audit, internal affairs, and a board meeting in 1 hour." Richard's mouth fell open. You can't just walk in here and—" "I can," Jack said quietly, "and I have." He nodded to Marcus, who stepped forward and handed Richard an envelope. Richard ripped it open and scanned the papers inside, his face draining of color as he reached the last page. "My resignation letter?" he whispered. "You prepared this?" "Jack, this isn't— You can't— I'm not asking for your resignation," Jack replied. "I'm accepting it." Richard looked around the office like someone might save him. But no one was coming. Not this time. Jack leaned forward. "Richard, this company trusted you. I trusted you. And you let the culture rot. Nepotism. Side deals. Useless hires. Lost contracts. You let people like Chad walk around with power they never earned. That ends today." Richard swallowed hard. "You're making a mistake." Jack didn't blink. "The only mistake was letting you run this place in the first place." When Jack turned to leave, Richard didn't follow. His era was over. The boardroom was filled with buzzing whispers when Jack entered. Every director who had once treated him as a polite afterthought now stared as if seeing a ghost. Jack didn't sit at the side of the table. He sat at the head. "Let's begin," he said. Marcus handed out folders, while Jack addressed the room with the certainty of someone who no longer had anything to prove. "For 15 years, I allowed Atlas Dynamics to operate independently. I stayed out of daily operations. I let the leadership evolve. But what I did not authorize," he said, his voice gaining an edge, "was the erosion of integrity inside these walls." He laid out evidence: improper contracts approved by Chad Wilson, nepotistic promotions under Richard's watch, financial black holes disguised as innovation initiatives. By the time he was done, the room felt smaller, the air heavier. One director finally spoke. "So, what exactly are you proposing, Jack?" "I'm not proposing," Jack said. "I'm informing." He glanced at Marcus, who slid forward 2 final documents. "Richard Hayes is stepping down effective immediately," Jack announced, "and Chad Wilson is terminated for cause." A collective exhale filled the room, half relief, half fear. "And the new CEO?" another director asked. Jack didn't hesitate. "Sam Brooks." The room erupted, but there were no arguments strong enough to counter Jack's authority, or Sam's qualifications. By the time the board meeting ended, the leadership of Atlas Dynamics had changed forever. Later that afternoon, Jack walked past the glass walls of the engineering floor. Sam, newly appointed as CEO, stood giving instructions to a group of managers. Her eyes shone with determination and humility, a rare combination. As soon as she saw Jack pass, she stepped out of the meeting room. "Jack, thank you," she said softly. "I won't waste this." "I know you won't." Sam smiled and returned to her meeting. And for the first time, Jack saw something growing inside Atlas Dynamics that he thought had died years ago. Hope. Emily waited for him outside the building, not with anger, with fear. "You fired them," she said quietly. "I held them accountable." She shook her head, voice trembling. "Jack, everything's changing so fast. People in the office think I knew. They think I hid it. They think I lied. My team is confused. I'm confused." Jack took a breath. "Emily, you spent years building a career on your own. You earned your role. I never took that from you." "Then why do I suddenly feel like I'm disappearing?" she whispered. "Because you're realizing that my life didn't orbit around yours. You just never asked who I really was." Her eyes glistened. "Jack, I'm your wife. Why didn't you trust me with this?" He looked at her steadily. "I didn't hide anything from you. You simply never asked, and when people mocked me, you let them." Emily wiped a tear. "So what now? Do you want to end things? Is this it?" Jack shook his head slowly. "I don't know what happens next, but I know what happens now." She swallowed. "What's that?" "I take back what I built. I restore this company. And if you want to stay with me, really stay, you need to grow with me. Not stand behind me, not ahead of me, beside me." Emily looked stunned, as if the man in front of her wasn't the same soft-spoken husband she'd teased at dinners and forgotten during late nights at the office. Because he wasn't. Not anymore. In the following weeks, Atlas Dynamics transformed. Transparency replaced secrecy. Leadership meetings were held with open doors. Contracts were audited thoroughly. Toxic patterns that thrived under Richard vanished. Employees began to smile again. Ideas flowed. Meetings were meaningful. The company felt alive. At the corporate awards ceremony a month later, the ballroom was packed. But this time, the energy was bright, not pretentious. Sam stood on stage as CEO, poised and confident. "Please welcome," she said, "the man whose vision brought Atlas Dynamics back to life, Jack Morgan." Jack walked onto the stage as applause rolled through the hall, genuine, warm, nothing like the forced laughter of that humiliating night. He looked out at the faces, respectful, hopeful, grateful. "This company," Jack began, "forgot what it was, but we remembered. We rebuilt. Together." He gestured toward Sam. "You proved that leadership is earned, not inherited. That competence matters more than connections." Then he looked out at the employees, the heart of the company. And when life tries to knock you down, you have two options: stay silent or stand up and take back what's yours. The room held its breath. Jack smiled. We stood up. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thunder. It was victory. It was a beginning.